Hello, what's up everyone? This is EJK, and today's video is going to be a TvT between TY and Bomber. I've always enjoyed watching TY play, not so much his TVZ, but his TVP and TvT. He has very good army movements, and he has solid macro and mechanics to back that up. And he's playing against none other than Bomber. Bomber, a character or a player that can be characterized by a lot of predictability, in my opinion. Always trying to go for the greediest possible builds with the least amount of scouting. And TY is able to abuse Bomber's playstyle through just being able to make more intelligent decisions based on what he scouts, which I'll be pointing out in a little bit. Bomber, though, another characteristic of his is that he is very strong at fighting in maxed army situations. Very famously, he used to have a pure bio style in TvZ, and there would always just be these very long parade pushes and bio units split up across multiple screens, and Bomber always had very good control over his entire army. Not so much his multitasking, his choice of strategy, or anything else, but just his ability to take good engagements, which we see play in his favor in this game. But TY has a stronger fundamental strategy that allows him to come back essentially from mistakes that he makes that puts him behind that would normally lose the game. So already TY has done a lot more scouting than Bomber has. Well, actually, not quite yet. They've both scouted that they're each going for Reaper Expand. TY was looking for proxies a little bit, and now he's going to be doing a 2 Reaper Poke. The third CC on the low ground is in reaction to seeing the Reaper Expand of Bomber, and he makes 2 Reapers, and then he makes the factory, and then the reactor, and then the gas. It lines up very nicely, and then you can kind of make a starport in a little bit as well. But you don't want to make the starport instantly because you're not trying to rush out a Viking, a Liberator, or medevac. They'll be used more for defensive purposes. And the idea behind this is to maximize your mineral income, which you need to be able to get up the 3 CCs running. Bomber, on the other hand, he's going for a 3rd CC as well. Not a bad choice. Very decent build by him. We see very similar builds from both players. However, the difference between the two builds is most notably that TY has been out on the map, very, very active in scouting. If we look on the mini-map, a lot of this area on TY's side of the map has, in fact, been scouted out by Reapers or by SCVs or something, whereas Bomber has not done any scouting at all. And Bomber is the type of player who's not going to scout, but instead build units or try to center his build around having enough units to defend different timings. So we see him having to build a Cyclone, whereas TY is able to build a Siege Tank first. That's very, very huge, especially when both players are going for a 3 CC build. A Cyclone, I would say, very defensive unit, isn't going to be paying off very much in the resources that you invest in it off of the builds that both players are doing. And Bomber, we see him building some missile turrets already as well, and he's building a Raven as too. So not only is he trying to be defensive, he doesn't know that TY is going for a 3rd CC. So TY has shown in some of his previous games that he likes to do a medevac tank drop. So the turrets are for that timing. And then the Raven is just for Cloak Banshees, and also auto turrets are very good defensively as well. So because of TY's scouting information, the fact that he's been able to his build, the way that he's playing makes him feel like makes him appear to be more comfortable with the situation than Bomber is. Bomber, a lot more hesitant and cautious whereas TY feels a lot more confident to be out on the map. We see the scan go down. Another additional scouting information from TY confirms that Bomber is going for a 3cc build, and or more importantly, I believe the 3cc was scouted by a Reaper earlier on, but more importantly, that scan actually scouts, like, let's go back to the scan so we can see what he sees. So he sees this. The most important thing he sees is that the starport, it's building a reactor right now. If he saw a starport with the reactor already done making Vikings, that would tell him that Bomber is going for a more air-heavy defensive style, and it's most likely going to be followed up with a later stim in favor of doing tank evac harass earlier on. And because TY is able to scan this, he knows that Bomber isn't going to be doing that. He's going for a fast stim, and he's not going to have a lot of starport units. So what TY ends up doing is pushing up into the front because he just essentially wants to poke with his army and to kind of apply a lot of pressure. It's very safe for him to move his army out on the map like this because he knows that Bomber doesn't have a medevac from the starport, and he knows that Bomber is in no position to be in an offensive position. So TY does not have to leave any of his units at home right now. And in fact, he can be out on the map and be able to apply this kind of pressure. Well, one noticeable advantage Bomber has is that he has a somewhat of a slight upgrade lead because he rushed his e-bays out so fast. With TY, if it was 3 tanks, like if that Cyclone was a tank, this would have been shut down a lot more easily, but that Cyclone was essentially useless. It can't get close enough to 2 tanks sieged up with some marine support. And now Bomber's in a little bit of trouble. He's not able to really clean this up, and he doesn't want to bum rush this because he doesn't want to take, he understands that he will have to give up a larger part of his army to be able to clean this up from TY, and TY is investing relatively little into this. He's going to simply just pick up the 2 siege tanks with his medevacs and back up. So Bomber being very patient, I think that's a very veteran style move out of Bomber, understanding, like, he is a champion, he's a very experienced player, and he understands when to be patient rather than panicking and trying to release the tension in the situation that TY had created. Another thing that Bomber does not like to do is he does not like to get a second factory. He prefers massive marine production. We see the second factory on the production tab for TY. Bomber is going to be adding multiple barracks before he adds a second factory, I believe. And this is a very good drop by TY. Lines up with Stim, his 1-1 is finished. Bomber doesn't have any sensor towers either. I guess his reasoning behind not having any sensor towers is he has these turrets, and they'll act as a deterrent, and they'll kind of put a timer on the medevacs so that he can move his army in position, perhaps. TY already having his turrets up around the time that if Bomber did a similar style drop, TY would have a much bigger heads up. And so TY is already doing a considerable amount of damage because Bomber essentially didn't have correct defense of a couple things and a couple situations in the game, and he didn't have a correct, or he had a very inefficient build in terms of scouting. He wasn't able to obtain good scouting information to make good decisions, but that's very typical of Bomber. He's not a very scouting timing oriented player, so that is kind of to be expected. So we see Bomber, he's playing very, very patiently, and TY getting these 2 tanks for essentially free. Very good trade, and even backing up as soon as the Marines are in enough of a number that they can overwhelm him. So getting out now, if he had one of the medevacs with the Marines at the bottom right hand side over here, I think he would have been able to do a lot more damage, and the game wouldn't have been close if he was able to drop that to the main. but some miscontrol prevented him from doing that, and the medevac ended up floating away faster than it should have. So the game has stabilized. Bomber has deflected off TY's harass. TY has a 4th base up though, and he really decided to start that 4th base really fast. Let's see. So this 4th base actually starts, I can go to the point. About now, like, he has the 2 sensor towers, they just finished, and now he's about to add on a 4th base, and we'll see on the minimap and the production tab while this drop is going on. So his 4th base is fairly fast, and he's in no rush to try to power up. This is, of course, Dusk Towers, so taking a 4th base like this and being able to defend it is a much easier task than doing this on a map, say Frozen Temple or Olrena. So it's a good choice of strategy by TY in being able to cut certain corners and get things out faster than his opponent due to being able to play the map well. So as the game stabilizes and TY has his 4th base up, Bomber does not have his 4th base up. So Bomber, essentially the only way he's going to win is by taking like a really good army engagement, and he knows this. This is how he wins most of his games. He doesn't usually win by economy. He usually likes to float his command centers over and try to just get the biggest army possible and then go for that one big fight, as we'll see a couple times throughout this game. And that is something that he is better than TY at. Like, don't get me wrong, Bomber does have his strengths, but on paper, TY's strengths kind of outclass Bomber's strengths in that Bomber, even if he is able to utilize his strengths, he isn't. TY's just overall gameplay is a lot more solid than Bomber's, so that TY can afford to make more mistakes and still end up winning a game, whereas someone like Bomber, every mistake he makes hurts him a lot more, and he doesn't have as much flexibility for coming back into a game with his kind of play style. So we see Bomber actually at 100 army supply. His opponent is at 105 now. Essentially, they're at even army supplies. TY characteristically likes to go up to the low 70s for SCV production. That essentially is 4 bases saturated, or three bases saturated with gas, and the 4th base a little more than halfway saturated. So he's basically on like 3.5 bases right now with low 70s workers, and he gets his 4th base fast enough so that it's okay to have that many workers. Bomber, on the other hand, is mining out quickly, and so it doesn't need as many workers as TY at this point in the game, so allowing Bomber to build more units. Bomber actually did get a second factory this game, my mistake, but it was a little bit slower than TY's. It was in, I believe, I forget who he played against. Maybe it was versus Cure or something, where he didn't get it wasn't, no, I don't think it was versus Cure. Something where he didn't get a second factory. He much prefers Bio, and of course it's very map dependent as well. Dusk Towers is a very good siege tank map, and is often the strongest style to dominate on this map. So what's going on here is TY's strategy essentially is to maintain an economic lead and essentially starve his opponent out. It's the safest way to win a game. It's not the quickest way, it's not the most flashy way, but it's just the safest, most you basically win the game because you mine more than your opponent, and so that's what TY is doing here. We see that reflected in him creating a fortified position outside of Bomber's 3rd base, so that Bomber's, when he tries to take his 4th base, it'll be a lot harder to access those minerals. Bomber is very patient. It's been shown multiple times throughout this game, and he waits until he's 200. He has a significantly larger army supply than his opponent, and he decides to move out now. And he's looking for that one big fight, and he's able to take a good engagement here because TY, if we see right here, the rest of TY's army is moving across the map, and it's quite a few units. So Bomber's entire army was in this fight, whereas TY's army was probably like 75% to 80% in the fight at the time. So Bomber was able to take a much more cost-efficient trade than his opponent. Being able to win that fight allows Bomber to establish that badly needed 4th base, or at least push enough area so that he can safely take that 4th base. Cue Bomber taking 4th base any second. He's too busy microing his army. The TY has the entire map shut down. Very, very, he does not want to be dropped, and it was also reflected in the fact that TY didn't have 100% of his army in the contain earlier originally, and he had a lot of his army at home that was to defend against any possible drops that might have slipped out by Bomber. So we see here TY trying to do some tank evac harass. Not the best idea against stimmed Marines, and TY ends up taking, I would say, not very good trades. His siege tank count was diminished a lot from this small skirmish, and I believe the next fight is about to happen soon. Okay, so Bomber does have a tank advantage. He has a very large tank advantage. He has more Marines as well, and more medevacs too, but medevacs aren't that important. TY has quite a few Vikings, I must say. But Bomber he knows that he has a higher tank count, so he can aggressively position his tanks in front of TY's tanks, and if essentially forces TY's Marines backwards, otherwise they get out DPS'd and die, leaves the siege tanks undefended and allows Bomber to push forward. So now it's 2 tanks versus 8 tanks, and this is the moment in the game where Bomber has an advantage. He took 2 good fights in a row. He doesn't have an economy, but he has the army size to make things happen. And this is a very difficult decision. Bomber decides to go for the production base of TY. If Bomber went for the planetary fortress with 40 Marines, I didn't say all of them because there's some rallying across, and 8 siege tanks, he would have easily been able to take out one of TY's bases. And then the game would have been 4 bases versus 4 bases. Right now, the game is currently 5 bases versus 4 bases, giving TY a very big advantage the longer he holds on. What Bomber is saying here is that he essentially wanted to get on top of TY's production, prevent TY's economy from, or prevent TY from really being able to use its economy. And like we see it here, Bomber has a very, very large advantage, but he decides to push up forward. And like doing that, yeah, he saves his units, but this is wasting valuable time. This allows TY to produce more production rounds worth of units, and essentially this is in TY's favor because the clock is not in Bomber's hands, it's in TY's hands, and the longer the game goes, the worse off Bomber is going to be. We see here the army's supplies quickly catching up. Bomber trying to go for a drop to get on top of the production, but we see this doesn't go very well at all. Very discombobulated army, and then gets flanked behind by the Marines. So TY was setting up a flank to flank this army if Bomber chose to push forward some more. Let's just show when these 3 medevacs. They could either be used to cut off reinforcements, so like this is a very smart move by TY, so he knows he's contained over here. He sends some of his army on this side of the map, so he can either directly counter over here, or just cut off the reinforcements, flanking, or even go over there. So just like, basically cutting off Bomber's army so that it's a do-or-die situation. Now, yeah, so Bomber this does not go very well for him at all. This was a very, I don't know what he was trying. I think he was just trying to get on top of. He was trying to, like, if TY maybe hesitated and didn't know where Bomber was moving, this might have worked. But Bomber wasn't able to unload any of his medevacs, loses his entire army, and now GG because he basically lost his entire army and he doesn't have an economy left. So he's forced to give up. Now, what I was saying earlier is about going for the 4th base. So if Bomber had gone for the 4th base right now, right now, let's say by 15 minutes he's able to both get over to TY's 4th base and quickly DPS it down. Currently, Bomber has a very significant army advantage in terms of like just unit composition wise. 3 tanks versus 8 tanks, 8 tanks, and more Marines to buffer as well. Gives Bomber a very big edge so they can push his way in. And so Bomber ended up choosing the greedy option of going for the throat when he should have gone for an arm or a leg. So instead of going here, if Bomber had taken out TY's 4th base, TY would have been essentially crippled in terms of its economy, and Bomber also would have kept his army alive, and being 4 bases versus 4 bases would have prevented TY from replenishing his army as quickly as he's doing right now. So like right now, he has enough units to be able to afford to send 3 medevacs worth of Marines. He has enough Marines because he just added on these 2 barracks around the time he was building his 5th base. So he has a total of like 13 Marine production, whereas Bomber has 11. I believe Bomber has 13 as well. He should, I believe. I don't know his production count. So if Bomber just went for the 4th base, and the 5th base isn't an the 5th base is an orbital command center as well, so that could have easily been shut down by a handful of a Marine drop. If Bomber just went for the 4th base and tried to play more conservatively and taking his advantages, I think he could have very easily won this game, even after having such a disastrous start, because of how he was taking good engagements. But this was just a last-ditch effort, and he's not able to win. I believe I did miss an engagement somewhere. I have in my notes. Oh, 1356. Okay, so I missed it a while ago. But essentially here, oh yeah, was when he was picking off the Marines, or the siege tanks, I believe. So, I just wanted to point out really quickly before I end the video, Bomber, very good at taking fights, and what ends up happening here is that essentially both players have a similar army, except that TY ends up TY ends up staggering his tanks, whereas Bomber has all his tanks in the same area, firing more concentrated firepower than TY's army. Is it over here? 1356. No, it can't be here. No, yeah, it's after this. My notes are wrong. So it's after this big fight. It's here, I believe. So what ends up happening here is TY ends up staggering his tanks. So he has 3 tanks forward, whereas Bomber has all of his tanks in a big group in medevacs, right? So TY's tanks are very out of position, and doing that is very greedy. So now he goes back, but if you take a look at his tanks, Bomber has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tanks. TY has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tanks, and the way that the tanks are positioned is very poor for TY. If all the tanks were sieged up like here, and Bomber tried to siege in and do what he's doing now, he for sure wouldn't have taken a very good engagement. But because TY's tanks are separated like that, and there's a couple more tanks at home, his army's all staggered out of position, and Bomber is fighting with a very concentrated force. Bomber is able to take a very surprisingly favorable engagement. Yeah, just kind of slowly pushing forward and picking off tanks one at a time, because 1 or 2 tanks isn't enough to DPS down a handful of Marines like we just saw there. So that's very good play by Bomber. He's very good at being aware of taking good engagements with his army. I just wanted to point that out. Alright, but yeah, that's pretty much the end of this video. So, ciao. Later, guys.